Iran, ladies and gentlemen, is a country twice as populous as Iraq, and with an impact on the global economy 5 times greater. A country that has more regular soldiers, ladies and gentlemen, than Germany, France, and Italy combined. It may be that this disaster in Iran ends soon, or the nightmare of Iraq repeats itself, but this time multiplied by n. In my opinion, February 15th, 2003 was one of those dates. On that Saturday, more than 3 million citizens took to the streets to demonstrate throughout Spain with a simple and resounding message: no to war. Spanish citizens who refused to give up their principles just to please an American president, who refused to support a lie that only aimed to make the rich richer and the poor even poorer. Polls from those days were very clear, they were very forceful, ladies and gentlemen. Less than 6% of Spaniards wanted Spain to join the conflict, and the then Prime Minister, José María Aznar, was perfectly aware of it, but he didn't care. He dragged us into that madness anyway because he wanted to feel important. Because he wanted the President of the United States, George Bush, to invite him for a cigar so he could put his feet on the table. A war in exchange for ego. The dignity of an entire country in exchange for that photo. What came afterward we know well because it is already part of history. The greatest geopolitical disaster in the world since the Vietnam War. The Iraq War, incidentally, precipitated the war in Syria, galvanized Al-Qaeda, stimulated the creation of Daesh, the so-called Islamic State, and paradoxically, ladies and gentlemen, paradoxically, greatly strengthened the Iranian regime of the Ayatollahs through the so-called Fertile Crescent. In Europe, this war, the war of, among others, Aznar, caused tensions among the member states, as you will remember, the old and the new Europe, depending on whether they were aligned with international law or not, also caused a substantial increase in fuel prices and the cost of living. The migration crisis was unprecedented in the Mediterranean, with jihadist attacks in Paris, London, Brussels, Barcelona, and Madrid. In these, more than 150 Spanish compatriots died. Mistakes were made in the past, and unfortunately, history repeats itself, but this time not as farce but as tragedy, because Aznar has been replaced by Mr. Feijóo and Mr. Abascal, and Bush have been replaced by Donald Trump. And instead of Iraq, we have Iran. By the way, Iran, ladies and gentlemen, is a country twice as populous as Iraq, and with an impact on the global economy 5 times greater. A country that has more regular soldiers, ladies and gentlemen, than Germany, France, and Italy combined. That is the military force that Iran has. With very advanced technologies, as we are seeing, capable of destroying planes in mid-flight, launching ballistic missiles at 4,000 kilometers away, controlling the Strait of Hormuz despite the presence of the American fleet. In short, Iran is a military power and has, by the way, been preparing for 40 years for a war like this. What I want to tell you with all of this is that we are not facing the same scenario as in the illegal war in Iraq. We are facing something worse. What consequences has this first month of war had? And I believe the data is very eloquent, because there have already been almost 2,000 confirmed deaths and probably 1,000 or thousands unconfirmed. More than 4 million displaced people in Iran and Lebanon, an Israeli Prime Minister, Netanyahu, emboldened, whose objective is to repeat in Lebanon the same destruction and suffering as that committed in Gaza. A cruel and illegal response from the Iranian regime to its neighboring countries, which we of course condemn and reject because an illegality cannot be answered with another illegality. About 12 billion euros or dollars, or rather, of public money spent on military operations. A severe contraction in tourism, maritime trade, and global air traffic. A drastic increase in the price of hydrocarbons, fertilizers, helium, and essential raw materials for the proper functioning of the global economy, and also for the food security of millions of people. And here in our country, diesel and gas have increased by 35% and 95% respectively. What have the promoters of this illegal war achieved? In my view, they have achieved the following. First, undermine international legality, destabilize the Middle East, reignite the conflicts in Iraq and Lebanon, bury Gaza under the rubble, but not this time under the rubble of concrete, but of oblivion and indifference. Bring insecurity to Gulf countries, which were safe countries until just under a month ago. In Iran and Tehran, replace one Khamenei with another Khamenei. Even worse, because Mojtaba is a leader just as dictatorial and even more bloodthirsty than his father. And moreover, unlike him, he is in favor of Iran developing nuclear weapons. In short, this is an absolute disaster. That is what the proponents of this war have achieved to date. As you know, we have denied the United States the use of the Rota and Moron bases for this illegal war. All flight plans that considered actions related to the operation in Iran have been rejected, all of them, including those of the refueling planes. It hasn't been easy, but I believe we have done it because, among other things, the bilateral agreement that manages these bases allows it, and because we are a sovereign country that does not want to participate in illegal wars. It is possible that diplomatic and financial pressure will take effect and lead to a cessation of hostilities. It is possible, but it is also possible that the escalation will continue, that the Strait of Hormuz remains closed, that there is a deployment of troops as we have seen today and clashes on the ground, that the war continues for a day, months, years. It may be that this disaster in Iran ends soon, or the nightmare of Iraq repeats itself, but this time multiplied by n, and that the world, Europe, and therefore Spain, suffer the economic consequences, the humanitarian drama, the security crisis, even greater than what was experienced in 2003 with the Iraq War. More than the United Nations headquarters or the submarines of NATO, the most important thing is to be coherent and consistent in the defense of the international order and international law. Because what we cannot do is condemn the invasion of Ukraine, as the majority of the Spanish citizens do, and also the government of Spain and the majority of these parliamentary groups, and applaud Iran's attacks. We cannot demand that the territorial integrity of Greenland be respected and remain silent when this territorial integrity is violated in Gaza or in Lebanon.